All right, welcome to Current Affairs Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith. As you may have noticed, Michael Turton is not here today. He's on vacation. Both of us will be back next week, but we're going to be recording next week on Monday rather than Sunday evening. Next Monday, the KMT primary results will be out, and we're going to have a lot to talk about. Now, meanwhile, of course, I'm going to honor Michael Turton with a shot of this later in the show. We'll keep it a little bit short today. Obviously, it's just me, so we'll move this along quickly. All right, right now there's a big rally in Hong Kong, and I hope that goes well. It's still ongoing, so we don't really know what's going on, what's going to end, how that's going to end, but hopefully it ends peacefully. The Soccer World Cup is going to start real soon, so go USA. Ke just went to China. I'll just say a few words on that before I get into the KMT primary. Ke went to China for the Twin Cities event with Shanghai and Taipei. Now, this has been going on for years. Now, of course, the National Mainland Affairs Council and the Tsai administration are somewhat annoyed with some of these local government interactions with China, because of course the Chinese government is not dealing directly with the central government in the way that would be a little bit more proactive or constructive, in part because of course the Tsai administration doesn't support the 1992 consensus, or the so-called 1992 consensus. And because, of course, the Tsai administration has stood fairly firm on Taiwan's sovereignty. Now, now that especially that the Chinese government has come out and Xi Jinping came out and explicitly tied the 1992 consensus to one country, two systems, that's pretty much buried that as a useful formula. Now, Ke has been touting his one big happy family. Not literally happy family, he just says one big family sort of routine, as referring to China and Taiwan. Now, this formulation, it appears that we now find that China seems to be okay with it, or seem to be okay with Ke. Now, Liu Jieyi, the Taiwan Affairs Office for the Chinese government, and the Taiwan Work Office for the Communist Party, which is probably the more important of the two positions, he met with Ke, but it was not announced until the day of. Now, why this would be, there's a good chance that this is to throw off the Taiwan Mainland Affairs Council, so that they wouldn't interfere. This gives Ke a little bit more leeway. It also means, from the Chinese side, that Ke could not be prepped by the Mainland Affairs Council, or at least not as well prepared. So, anyway, so they met, they talked a bit, and Liu did not talk about any of the major, didn't use any of the major formulations that make people quite upset with China, particularly I didn't refer to one country, two systems, for example. Now, Ke is trying to create his own path toward dealing with China, which is different from the KMT, probably a little less close than the KMT would like, but he wants to keep open lines of communication far stronger than the DPP would like. Now, if this sounds like it's a centrist position, I would say that it's a Taipei centrist position. I think that it's closer to the KMT stance if looked at sort of from a national perspective. But within Taipei, that would sound very centrist. So he's in China. He met with Liu. And we'll see what happens with the rest of the Twin Cities forum. Now, Ke is also using these kinds of activities to possibly prepare for a run for president, which we know is definitely a possibility. He hasn't formally done it, so we'll see what happens. All right, so today there was a big KMT rally against the changes to the referendum law. Now, there's a lot of ironies in this, but originally the KMT didn't want to change the referendum law. The DPP came into office, they changed the referendum law, lowered the thresholds to make it much, much easier to hold referendums. This kind of blew up in their face during the last local election. What ended up happening is that KMT allied people held a series of referendums against, for example, marriage equality and for nuclear power. The public went along and voted for them. Now, there's concerns about how these were worded. There are concerns about how they were allowed in. And so there's a lot of problems with it. So the DPP went back to try and deal with this, and so they made a series of modifications. A big one is that referendums can now only be held once every 2 years, and then only in August. So what that means is that it separates the referendum vote from regular votes, and it also separates it from the electoral cycle. And so this means it's going to be very, very hard to get a turnout for the referendum for the referendum vote, because it's not concurrent with any other election going on. So this makes it harder for a referendum to pass. Now that the KMT tasted some of the positive sides, or for them politically, of having the referendum law, now they're very much in favor of keeping the law that the DPP passed previously. So that's what but really another big reason for the rally today is this is the last big rally, and it looks like, from what I've seen on the TV, it's still ongoing. It looks to have been fairly well attended. Lots of, all the major KMT heavyweights and candidates in the primary were all there. Eric Chu showed up in a bunch of ROC flag gogoros, which were very cute. And some Han and Terry Gou supporters got into some heated arguments, which is not the first time. There seems to be some bad blood between the two sides here and their supporters. So that's going to be very interesting. So let's move into the primary itself. All right, so there's 5 primary candidates, and there are 5 key people, but they're not all the same. Now, I wrote an article for Ketagalang Media, which, as of this taping, has not been released, but they have it. And what I mean by that, there's 5 key people, and there's 5 people in the primary. Of the 5 people in the primary, 2 are basically nobodies. An NTU professor who is essentially, let's all just give up now. And there's Zhou Shiwei, who I've met several times, the ex-one-term Taipei County Commissioner. And he had some very strong nationalist stances that were, to put it mildly, impractical. So the big 3 candidates running in the KMT primary are Eric Chu, or Zhu Liluan, the ex-mayor of Taipei, New Taipei City, fairly stable, solid politician. He won re-election, so he's considered fairly a fairly accomplished politician, reasonably well liked. He has pretty normal policy proposals for a KMT politician. So he's a typical candidate, and compared to the other ones, he's kind of the grown-up in the room. Now, he has one huge, giant problem, and that is that he was the KMT candidate during the last presidential election, and he got mauled. He had 31%, something like that. So, if there's going to be a rerun of 2016, usually you don't run somebody who's been beaten that badly. Now, the DPP did run Tsai Ing-wen. She lost in 2012. They ran her again in 2016, and she did win. So there is precedent for candidates who've lost coming back, but Eric Chu was crushed in 2012. So he didn't just lose, he lost in a landslide. So, now there's Terry Gou, Guo Taiming. He, of course, is the billionaire founder of Honhai, or known as Foxconn overseas. He's been doing fairly well in the polls. He's been picking up some momentum. So he's moving into this referendum week pretty strong. Now, he started off to a very rough start when he started campaigning. Right in the beginning, he was thin-skinned. He had some kind of bizarre, off-the-cuff things to say. He started off his campaign as shouting at a DPP legislator for not looking at his hat or something like this. And he also caused a lot of kerfuffle with his comments about his wife being his harem. And he launched his campaign announcing that the sea goddess Matsu had commanded him or told him to run. However, he's become much more polished. In the meantime, he's become much more likable, good-humored. He hasn't lost his temper. He's more or less stayed on focus. And he comes across as confident, and he's picking up some younger voters because a lot of his message is about building prosperity and growth for the future so that the young in Taiwan can have good futures for themselves. He's also campaigning heavily on boosting the birth rate. Now, the birth rate is obviously, Taiwan is, some years it's the lowest in the world or very near the bottom. And so he's planning to subsidize that to the tune of 160 billion annually. Now, a lot of that money, he says, is going to come from, there's already about 60 billion out there in subsidies already, so he'd be upping it by about 100 billion. He says that a lot of this money initially would come from his own pockets. He's a multi-billionaire in US dollars, so he's got some money. But he also wants to raise taxes on the very wealthy. Now, he says, as a very wealthy businessman, he could implement this far better and far more effectively than anyone else. One of the big concerns that a lot of people have with him as a candidate is that most of his business concerns and money was made in China. And as we've talked on the show before, you can't be a very big, powerful business person in China without good, strong ties to the Chinese Communist Party. So there's a lot of concerns about his ties there. He's been cleverly deflecting this in several ways by saying things like, we're going to, I'm going to, that Han Hai can have, he's already stepped down from the position, other people are running it, different person can run China. Now, another interesting thing that's happened is Robert Tsai, which we referred to last week, who runs the Want group, which has the China Times, CTI TV. It's a major media group, and it's very pro-China. They get massive subsidies in China from the government, totally unrelated to the media group and its political stance, of course. The fact that they're very pro-unification has nothing to do, it's totally unconnected, according to the company. So, but Terry Gou has come out, Guo and slammed him and his media, saying it's, what was the words, something like the puppet or of the Taiwan Affairs Office in China, and he said he's not going to do any more interviews with their pro-China media group, so he sounds almost like he's not pro-unification, or at least he's strong on Taiwan sovereignty. So what's interesting is he's sounding actually more like an old-line KMT politician rather than the newer generation. The newer generation tends to be more pro-China, and whereas Guo seems to be taking a line which is more, we want to keep it strong, we're pro-one China, but it's the ROC, and it's, he's been very strong on the standard KMT formulation of the 1992 consensus, which is both sides have their own interpretations, which China never recognizes. They only ever recognize the one China part of that, not both sides with their own different interpretations. So Terry Gou is sounding like he's a little bit stronger, and would be stronger in defending Taiwan sovereignty. That's what he's sounding like. So that's how he's messaging himself. So again, he's been picking up in the polls. He's been doing reasonably well, building some momentum, and that's what he's coming into this primary with. The front runner is Dan Han, the Cabbage Man, Han Kuo-yu, the mayor of Kaohsiung City. Now, he, of course, won the election to Kaohsiung mayorship in a shock win for the KMT. They considered the city basically unwinnable. And he won this in a major, in a landslide. Everyone was stunned, and there was a massive hand wave around the country. He's charismatic, he's likable, he's Mr. Man Next Door. We've talked a lot about him on the show, so you can listen to some of the earlier shows to get a lot of that. But he's got a very solid core of supporters. He also has very high, a very large percentage of the population very emphatically dislikes him. So he's in a difficult position. So now, long term, as the better candidate, both, or I'd say all three, myself, Nathan Batto, and Michael Turton, all of us think that Terry Gou is probably the KMT's better bet as a candidate. But in the primary, it looks like Han Kuo-yu is the front runner. In spite of the polls showing Terry Gou and Daniel Han Kuo-yu within with only a very narrow margin separating them. And so, I mean, it really could go either way. And by the way, I do think that Eric Chu or Chu, he'll probably do a little better than I think people are expecting him to, is my guess, because he is the grown-up in the room and the other two are populists. So I think there's going to be some people thinking maybe we should choose the conservative candidate, and, because we don't, as he put it in the last debate, the policy presentation, you vote for someone that you know that you won't regret after Election Day. So, now, in terms of who is going to win, I want to bring up Nathan Batto's article over at Frozen Garlic. Now, here's what he says. He says, "Let me state my conclusion first. Han is a prohibitive favorite to win the polling primary and thus the KMT nomination." Now, he brings up the point which pretty much everybody knows, which is that Han's demographic is primarily, and everybody is aware of this, is that he has an advantage in that this is a landline-only primary, which, by the way, starts tomorrow or Monday, goes through to next Sunday, and then on the Monday, next Monday, not tomorrow, the one after, the 15th, the KMT is scheduled to announce the results, which, again, by the way, we will be recording one day late. The next edition of Current Affairs Taiwan will be that Monday, not Sunday, as normal. Now, the reason why I bring up the Frozen Garlic piece here is he brings in several points which most, because he's very professional here. He brings up a couple of things which other people have not focused on. The single most important fact is that in every poll, Han does better than Gou in the three-way race. Forget Tsai and Ko for a minute and just focus on Han and Gou. Han's support is always 3 to 5% higher than Gou's. For example, in the UDN poll, it is irrelevant that Han beats Tsai by 13%, while Gou beats her by 12%. What matters is that Han gets 35% and Gou gets 31%. So Han leads Gou by 4%. This is not how we usually look at polls, but this is how the KMT will calculate its inter-party question, which accounts for 85% of the KMT's nomination decision. Again, in 5 polls with wildly different inter-party outcomes over the past 2 weeks, Han always beats Gou by a consistent margin of 3 to 5%. This pattern has also emerged in every other poll I've seen seen over the past month or two, though Han's lead has sometimes been bigger. So, Han's demographic, being a landline, they tend to be in the 45 to 65-year-old range. They're more likely to be home near a landline than Han Kuo-yu, which all of us know. Plus he also goes on to bring out, which is an important point, is that Han supporters may be more likely to mobilize to wait by the phone or be at home in case there is a primary phone call. So right now, even though I think that their support as people among the population at large is very similar, I think that he makes an excellent case here that Han Kuo-yu is going into this, as he puts it, as a prohibitive favorite to win the polling primary, because of the way the primary is being held and the way that they're calculating it. So I very strongly recommend reading this piece. It's an excellent, excellent piece. It goes into a lot of depth. Frozen garlic, that's what the site looks like. Anyway, definitely check it out. It's very worth a look at. All right, so let's now I mentioned that there's 5 key people in this primary. And it's the 3 candidates, and of course Wu Duanyi, who's the party chair, and Wang Jin-pyng. And the reason why these 2 are so important, and I'm just going to quickly go into a little bit of background here. In the last election, heading on the in the final few weeks of the local elections held last November, which were swept by the KMT. It was a devastating blow, wiped out the DPP, and so the KMT won big, including winning the very important city of Kaohsiung, which was considered almost impossible. Now, the reason why Han Kuo-yu was down there pretty much in the first place is probably because he had the nerve to challenge Wu Duanyi in the race for party chairman. Now, the party chair historically has been the presidential candidate, and that's important. We're going to come back to that. Now, Han Kuo-yu was sent down to Kaohsiung. He hooked up with Wang Jin-pyng. Wang Jin-pyng is the most important figure in the local patronage factions. I won't go into too much detail, but essentially these are traditional. When the KMT arrived, they couldn't use people they brought over from China for everything. They tried, but they couldn't. So what they did is they found local politicians who are local Taiwanese, and what they did is they basically brought them into the KMT, and they would patronize them, and they would always make sure there was 2, and there were at least 2, and limited to a geographic area. So there would be, for example, there would be the red or the white faction is in Kaohsiung, or in Zhanghua. There's the red and the black factions here in Taichung. And the KMT could control them. First, they would, because they provided a lot of money to them through local agricultural associations, credit unions, and so on and so forth. And then what they would do is that they would keep them antagonistic, and so they balanced each other out, and limited geographically so they couldn't build a large power base that was national. Now, Wang Jin-pyng managed to do something that they hadn't really been able to do very effectively in the past. He brought together these mutually antagonistic factions together in a way that was largely unprecedented, not completely, but largely, in big areas of the country where these factions still hold power. And that was key to Han Kuo-yu's win, and also was very important in helping Liu Xiuyan, for example, in Taichung, and a lot of the other races and smaller races. So if you looked at all the campaign materials, who was on the stage, during the last few weeks of the election last time, it was Han Kuo-yu, it was Liu Xiuyan here in Taichung, it was Hou You-yi, Wang Jin-pyng, and these were the faces that we were seeing. Wu Duanyi dropped out of the picture and was largely hiding out up in Taipei with Ding Shouzhong, who was not appearing in advertising or on stage outside of Taipei very much in the last few weeks. When the election turned into a major landslide in all the areas where Wang Jin-pyng had considerable influence, he, of course, I would assume, it's fairly safe to assume that his his stock within the party rose significantly. So he was looking good. He had a great ally, and Han Kuo-yu was hugely popular, Dan Han, the Cabbage Man. And so he was looking good, and he announced that he was running for president. Wu Duanyi, of course, being the party chair, is the presumptive nominee, and of course he wanted to run. But he was doing terribly in the polls. Meanwhile, and the party, inside the party, Wang Jin-pyng was riding high. He'd essentially, he was instrumental player in winning the last election. Wu Duanyi, when you're the party chair of a party who's won a landslide election, normally you'd be riding high, but he wasn't. He was looking weak. So Wu Duanyi pulled an end run around Wang Jin-pyng. What Wu Duanyi did is he threw his support and backing and pushed to get Han Kuo-yu to run for president. Now you'll notice that Han Kuo-yu took quite a while to come up with his decision. He spent a lot of time thinking about it, he was hemming and hawing, but eventually he came out and said, I am going to run. About the same day, or within one day of Han Kuo-yu formally announcing that he was joining the KMT primary, Wang Jin-pyng formally quit the KMT primary. Now, Wang Jin-pyng wants to be president, as we've talked about on this show several times, or he wants to be the party chairman. Or he also, and of course another thing that would be important to him is to, help his people, the factions, with money, power, and patronage. That's what they do. So what he does and what Wu Duanyi does is going to be very interesting. So Wang Jin-pyng has stated just before he dropped out of the presidential primary, he stated that I'm going to be in this to the end. And that's still his stance. He hasn't ruled out doing an independent run. He said it's still early. So, now, what happens if Han Kuo-yu wins the primary? Now, in my Critical Lab Media piece, I talked a lot about what I just described here, but I want to start going into something that I didn't, which I've saved for you guys. Only Michael Turton has heard this from me. And that is, what happens if Han Kuo-yu wins? What does Wang Jin-pyng and Terry Gou do? They've been spending a lot of time together recently, though Wang Jin-pyng has been making a case that he's spending time with everybody, and he's Mr. Likeable. So if you're Terry Gou has refused to sign off a statement saying that he would rule out an independent run if he lost the primary. Think about that. Now, he has publicly stated, I haven't thought about it. Nah, no way. We want the KMT to win. Well, of course he's going to say that going into the primary for the KMT. I mean, that's what he's going to say. So, now think about this. If he loses, which there's a pretty good chance he will, he could still pull this out, definitely. But if he doesn't, think about this. This is a self-made billionaire. He compares himself to Genghis Khan. He's a no prisoners type of guy. He goes out and he gets what he wants, and he's always succeeded at doing it for the most part. I mean, he's one of the most successful businessmen in the world. Now if he loses the primary, what's to stop him from doing an independent run? He refused to sign off saying he wouldn't. He's got the money. This is his big one goal that he's declared that he's wanted to get, and he hasn't won it yet. So why not do that? There's a very good chance that he will. So, what does Wang Jin-pyng do? Now this is the really interesting question, because we know that he wants to be party chairman. We know that he wants the presidency, and these are two things that he has not gotten. Either one of those two things. So he could just continue his run for presidency, possibly run as an independent, but he's not doing that well in the polls. He actually has more support among DPP supporters than KMT supporters, but he's a KMT member. But he's not doing great in either group. Now, if he's a loyal party man, which he always has said he is, maybe he drops his run for presidency in spite of saying that he's going to do it to the end, and loyally supports, if Han Kuo-yu is the candidate, loyally supports him, even though Han has already betrayed him at the behest of Wu and Wang. And of course, Wang Jin-pyng and Wu and Wang have some bad blood here. So, now, Wang Jin-pyng and Gou Taiming are spending some time together. What could these two offer each other? I'm just speculating, of course. But what could they offer each other? And this is a very interesting thing. What Gou Taiming, or Terry Gou, does not have is a political party and a ground game. Wang Jin-pyng has a ground game. That's something to offer him. Now, but Wang Jin-pyng wants to be president, right? And he wants to be the chairman of the KMT. How would this possibly help Wang Jin-pyng? What's in it for him? Possibly something along these lines. Wang Jin-pyng stays in the party. And he works to get the factions to support Terry Gou from within the party. In other words, they just ignore who their party's candidate is and go support him. Now, why would they do that, and why would Wang Jin-pyng do that? Money. Terry Gou has tons and tons and tons of money. He can afford to provide them all the patronage that they could possibly need. And the KMT has not been giving them much in the way of patronage, and they have lost a lot of their money recently as part of the transitional justice law that recently has taken away a lot of their what used to be either the richest or one of the richest political parties in the world. So the KMT doesn't have much to give them. But Terry Gou does. So, worst case scenario here for Wang Jin-pyng is he gets money for his people, makes them happy, he's been loyal to them, and that means that they stay loyal to him, not Wu and Wang. He gets his revenge on Wu and Wang. Now this opens up a few other possibilities. This does mean giving up running for president, but he's the possible one who could broker a deal either before or after the election, whereby if it looks like Terry Gou might win, then he's the one who's in the position to broker a deal to bring Terry Gou back into the party, either as their candidate or, if he wins the election, as the president. Now, maybe Terry Gou doesn't do very well in the polls. Okay. But by pulling out the factional support from under the, basically pulling the rug out from under whoever the official KMT candidate is, if it's Han Kuo-yu especially, this means that now Wang Jin-pyng is the power broker. Now, this means that for party unity and to restore the powerful unified force that won so well in the local election last time, he might have some leverage to say, basically, I want the chairmanship. Now, he's got powerful opponents within the KMT. There are elements within the KMT, the Huang Fuxing, for example, the Military Veterans Association, which are very powerful, very influential, and they will do everything they can to stop him. But if he's the one that is if he's holding the crux of power, he might be able to swing it. If he, let's put it this way, if he doesn't do this, he doesn't have that. If he does this, he has a shot at it. So that could be something he's got in mind. Now, I think, and we kind of alluded to this in the past, both me and Michael, Wu is probably biding his time. If you look at the past, normally the party chair is the presidential candidate. That's the way it normally works here in Taiwan. And in the beginning of the last election was the exception. And that's when we had Hong Xiu-zhu won the primary. Eric Chu, or Zhu Liluo, didn't even run. And when it became clear in the fall that she was a hopeless candidate, there was no way she could possibly win, the party basically pulled together a party conference, ousted her as the official candidate, and brought in Eric Chu as their candidate. And now he was the chairman at the time. So they restored the normal order of bringing in the party chair as the party candidate. Order was restored, and they got killed anyway. So he may be biding his time, thinking that if Han Kuo-yu and yet another scandal comes out, I mean, keep in mind there was he killed somebody accidentally with a car, and he's currently under investigation for financial improprieties, and there's a whole lot that could come out here. And you can, by the way, in that Frozen Garlic article, you'll find out some more about his past, which is fascinating stuff. Read that article. So he's probably biding his time, hoping that if the party just might need their candidate replaced, he's there as the chairman. So that's probably what his calculation is. Now, Wu and Wang are both very powerful and influential people. They have the support of powerful and influential people. We'll see what happens. This is, of course, this last part here about Wang and Wu is of course, speculation, but we'll see what happens. It should be a very, very interesting race. So, all right, Michael, I'll see you next week on the show, and we'll be talking about who actually has won the KMT primary. All right, look forward to you then. And by the way, don't drink and drive, and don't drive and drink. By law, we have to say that.